made his great horror pictures, of which you were a great part of back in the 40s.
Yes, so Val came into RKO in early.
I always believe the ultimate goal is to get the best picture one can, and the filmmaking process demands a collaborative effort.
Robert Wise never sought the spotlight or fame that came with being a director. His journey in Hollywood began humbly in 1933 when he started working in the shipping room at RKO Studios. Through dedication and hard work, he gradually climbed the ranks, first becoming a sound editor and then advancing to film editor. By the time he reached the young age of 26 in 1941, he found himself working alongside Orson Welles on the groundbreaking film Citizen Kane. Over the course of his remarkable career spanning 6 decades, Wise would go on to win 4 Academy Awards and establish himself as one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. His impressive list of achievements is extensive and demonstrates his versatility as a director. Films like West Side Story and The Sound of Music transformed him into Hollywood royalty, earning both critical acclaim and commercial success. However, despite his accomplishments, critics often referred to him as an anti-auteur because his work lacked a distinctive signature style that audiences could immediately recognize. This label didn't bother Wise in the slightest. He firmly believed that directors should adapt themselves to serve the story they were telling, rather than forcing every story to fit into their personal artistic vision. Throughout his career, he successfully tackled various genres, including horror, musicals, science fiction, westerns, and war films. Each production looked distinctly different from the others because Wise understood that every story demanded its own unique approach and treatment. His guiding philosophy remained simple and clear throughout his entire career. He believed in tailoring himself to fit the film, rather than molding the film to match his preferences. The movies that Wise admired most revealed his nature as a craftsman who carefully studied the work of other craftsmen. The films that shaped his understanding of cinema taught him valuable lessons about editing techniques, creating atmosphere, maintaining social conscience, and mastering the invisible art of making audiences experience emotions without showing them the mechanics of how those feelings were created. Wise was merely an assistant editor when he worked on The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1939. He observed director William Dieterle guide Charles Laughton's portrayal of Quasimodo, examining the movie frame by frame. The Gothic shadows and expressionist lighting techniques employed in the film left a lasting impression on his memory. This experience served as his practical film school, teaching him how editors create rhythm and pacing from a director's original vision. Laughton's powerful performance taught Wise something crucial about portraying monstrous characters. Quasimodo wasn't frightening because of his physical deformity. Instead, he became a tragic figure because of his fundamental humanity. This important lesson would resonate throughout Wise's entire filmmaking career. From The Body Snatcher to The Day the Earth Stood Still, his films often featured outsiders, creatures, and aliens who were all searching for human connection in a world that feared and rejected them. The atmospheric approach to horror demonstrated in Notre Dame influenced everything Wise would later create with producer Val Lewton. The bell tower of Notre Dame became a template for generating dread through architectural spaces and strategic use of shadow. Wise learned that explicit horror wasn't necessary. Instead, filmmakers could make audiences feel claustrophobic, as if stone walls were slowly closing in around them. Wise called The Body Snatcher from 1945 his personal favorite among all the films he directed. This third collaboration with producer Val Lewton reinforced the lesson that genuine terror lives in suggestion rather than spectacular displays. Boris Karloff portrayed a grave robber who supplied cadavers to Henry Daniels' ambitious surgeon character. The true horror of the film didn't come from the dead bodies themselves, but rather from the moral corruption that resulted from making compromises with darkness. Luton's filmmaking philosophy was straightforward and effective. What audiences don't see on screen becomes scarier than what they do see. Wise directed The Body Snatcher on an extremely limited budget that forced creative problem-solving. Every shadow had to serve multiple purposes. Every creaking floorboard needed to suggest the presence of death lurking nearby. The enthusiastic reviews established Wise as a director who genuinely understood how to create atmosphere. This film connected directly to The Haunting, which he would make 18 years later. Both films demonstrated an understanding that true horror operates on a psychological level. The fear doesn't come from a ghost standing in a hallway. Rather, it emerges from watching a character's mind gradually unravel as they question whether the ghost exists at all. Through working with Luton, Wise discovered that the audience's imagination functions as the most powerful special effect available to any filmmaker. For the setup in 1949, Wise dedicated weeks to researching in shabby boxing arenas. He photographed fighters and their desperate fans. He observed aging boxers absorbing punishment for minimal pay. Robert Ryan played Stoker Thompson, an over-the-hill fighter who refused to throw a fight as ordered. The film unfolded in real time across 72 minutes. Every punch landed with the weight of mortality itself. This project demonstrated how Wise's background in editing made him a superior director. The setup moved with the natural rhythm of a human heartbeat. There was no additional musical score except for what came from the arena radio. Audiences heard only crowd noise, the sound of leather striking flesh, and the heavy breathing of men who understood they were just one punch away from oblivion. The film won the Critics' Prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Martin Scorsese studied this film before creating Raging Bull. Quentin Tarantino referenced it in the Bruce Willis storyline of Pulp Fiction. Wise understood boxing as a metaphor for working-class survival. Every fight represented a battle for dignity. Every round showed the refusal to quit, even when quitting seemed like the sensible choice. The setup taught him that choosing realism in filmmaking is fundamentally a moral decision. The Magnificent Ambersons from 1942 became the film that haunted Robert Wise for 40 years. Orson Welles had shot what many considered a masterpiece. However, RKO Studios grew anxious after conducting test screenings. They ordered Wise to re-edit the film while Welles was away in Brazil. Wise cut more than 40 minutes from the original version. He shot new scenes, including a completely different ending. He knew that Welles would hate what the studio had forced him to do. Welles held a grudge against Wise until 1984. They finally reconciled publicly when the Directors Guild honored Welles with a Lifetime Achievement Award. They shook hands on stage, and Wise released the guilt he had carried for 4 decades. He understood that he had participated in damaging a work of genius, but he had only been 27 years old, and the studio owned the film negative. The Magnificent Ambersons remained extraordinary, even in its altered form. The cinematography by Stanley Cortez, Agnes Moorehead's performance, and the tracking shots through the Amberson mansion still impressed viewers. Wise learned a difficult lesson about artistic compromise in the film industry. Sometimes the studio wins the battle. Sometimes professionals must live with decisions they made simply to survive in the business. John Ford's fog-drenched Dublin masterpiece, The Informer, from 1935, gave Wise another education. Wise worked as a sound editor on this production. Victor McLaglen won an Oscar playing Gippo Nolan, a man who betrays his friend for 20 pounds. The film represented pure German expressionism transplanted to an Irish setting. Every shadow conveyed guilt. Every streetlight illuminated moral decay. Wise learned from Ford how sound design creates atmosphere. The footsteps echoing on cobblestones, the distant singing emanating from a pub, and the silence when Gippo realizes what he has done all contributed to the film's power. Max Steiner's musical score didn't simply accompany the action, it became Gippo's conscience, with music serving as guilt-given melody. The Informer influenced all of Wise's noir work, including Born to Kill, Blood on the Moon, and Odds Against Tomorrow. These films all used shadow and sound to explore moral darkness. Ford proved that genre films could achieve the status of art, that material typically associated with B pictures could carry the weight of genuine tragedy. Wise never forgot this lesson. He applied it throughout 40 years of filmmaking across every genre that Hollywood produced. Top Hat from 1935 featured Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing to Irving Berlin's songbook. Wise worked as an editor at RKO when this film reminded Depression-era audiences what joy looked like, offering pure escapism as high art. The precision required to edit dance sequences taught him about rhythm in ways that no other genre could match. Dance editing constitutes its own specialized language. Editors cannot cut on any random frame. They must feel where the movement naturally wants to breathe. Astaire and Rogers moved as if physics didn't apply to their bodies. The editor's responsibility was to honor that illusion and make the cuts invisible. Every frame needed to serve the flow of movement. Top Hat connected directly to West Side Story and The Sound of Music decades later. Wise understood that musicals demand technical perfection in service of emotional truth. Audiences shouldn't see the craft, they should only feel the moment when Astaire and Rogers become weightless. That represents the invisible art that Wise spent his career pursuing across every genre he tackled. Sergei Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin from 1925, particularly the Odessa Steppes sequence, became the most famous piece of editing in cinema history. Every film student studies it carefully. Wise studied it like sacred scripture. The way Eisenstein created rhythm through montage, with the baby carriage rolling down the steps, soldiers firing in geometric formations, and people running while time stretched and compressed simultaneously, revolutionized filmmaking. Eisenstein proved that editing transcends simply cutting film. It creates meaning through collision. When two images are placed next to each other, they generate a third idea that neither image contains independently. This theory of montage formed the foundation of cinema as an art form distinct from theater or literature. Wise applied Eisenstein's lessons throughout his entire career. The breakfast sequence in Citizen Kane used montage to show a marriage deteriorating across years. The Jets and Sharks dancing in West Side Story created meaning through movement and cutting. Wise understood that film primarily functions as a visual medium. The editing process is where the movie actually gets made. Wise called The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951 one of his personal favorites among his own films. Michael Rennie portrayed Klaatu, the alien visitor warning Earth about nuclear destruction. Patricia Neal played the woman who helped him. Bernard Herrmann's musical score sounded like the future warning the present. This represented science fiction taken absolutely seriously. Most science fiction films from the 1950s embraced camp aesthetics. The Day the Earth Stood Still offered philosophy disguised as genre entertainment. Edmund North's screenplay addressed Cold War paranoia, humanity's self-destructive impulses, and the question of whether we deserve to survive our worst instincts. Klaatu wasn't a monster, he was a disappointed teacher watching his students fail basic ethics. Wise directed the material with zero irony. He used real news reporters covering Klaatu's landing. He shot on location in Washington, D.C. to ground the fantasy in reality. The film's message was radical for 1951. Humans are the real monsters. Our greed and closed-mindedness will destroy us unless we change. The universe will eliminate the threat if we don't improve. That moral seriousness elevated genre filmmaking forever. John Ford's adaptation of Steinbeck's Depression-era epic The Grapes of Wrath from 1940 showed American cinema confronting America's failure to protect its own people. Greg Dolan's cinematography made Oklahoma dust look like the end of civilization itself. The Joad family fled to California seeking a better life. Tom Joad's final speech about being everywhere people struggle resonated powerfully. Wise was a lifelong liberal who contributed to the American Civil Liberties Union. The Grapes of Wrath showed him that popular cinema could carry social conscience. Filmmakers didn't need to make propaganda to make a difference. They simply needed to tell the truth about working-class survival, show dignity within poverty, and make audiences see themselves in people they would normally ignore. This film influenced Wise's commitment to racial tolerance in his own work. The setup featured African-American characters with complexity and depth. Odds Against Tomorrow dealt with how racism destroyed a heist crew. West Side Story transformed immigrant gang warfare into Shakespeare. Wise understood that entertainment and social commentary aren't opposites, but partners. The best films accomplish both goals simultaneously. Citizen Kane from 1941 changed Robert Wise's life completely. Orson Welles was 25 years old and had never made a movie before. RKO initially assigned an older, more experienced editor. Welles fired him and hired Wise, who was 26. They were young filmmakers creating what would become known as the greatest film of all time, though neither of them knew it yet. Wise assembled the famous breakfast sequence showing Kane's first marriage dissolving across years. Welles shot the scenes, but Wise created the rhythm through editing and whip pans. The pacing and feeling of time accelerating were achieved in the cutting room. Welles taught Wise about deep focus photography and how lighting creates psychology. Greg Toland showed both of them what a camera could truly accomplish. Wise received his first Oscar nomination for editing Citizen Kane. Everything he learned about sound, shadow, rhythm, and ambition came from working with Welles on this groundbreaking film. 40 years later, he would reconcile with Welles about the magnificent Ambersons. But Citizen Kane was where everything began. The shipping room kid became a master craftsman by cutting a masterpiece. From his beginnings as a film editor to becoming a 4-time Oscar winner, Robert Wise learned his craft by watching masters work. His favorite films revealed a craftsman studying craft across multiple genres and decades. He dedicated himself to 8 decades of excellence in service of stories rather than ego. His legacy demonstrates that great filmmaking comes from adapting to each story's unique needs rather than imposing a rigid personal style. Through studying these influential films, Wise developed into one of Hollywood's most versatile and respected directors, proving that the invisible art of filmmaking often creates the most powerful and lasting impact on audiences.